Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
Welcome in to another historical pie chart edition.
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
Of Purple Daily here. Daily Vikings entertainment, where we just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. The show is presented by our friends over at TCL, one of the world's best-selling consumer electronics brands. They have a new lineup of award-winning TVs delivering the most entertainment with stunning resolution at an affordable cost. Learn more at TCL.com. Inspire greatness with TCL. Today's historical pie chart.
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
Is a look back almost 2 decades ago at the Vikings-Packers wild card playoff game from the 2004 season, in which I believe Judd was a Packers beat writer for this game for the Star Tribune, right?
Yeah, it was my swan song on the Packers beat because I transitioned to join Kevin Seifert on the Vikings beat in 2005. So this was the last game I covered the Packers for, and it was also the game that triggered the decision to make Ted Thompson the GM and Mike Sherman just the coach, which of course was the end for Sherman. It was then only a question of time.
And then he coached one more year, and then they fired him for McCarthy.
Yeah,
Mike McCarthy. But they were trying to get Brad Childress.
Yeah, supposedly. That's what Brad said. Brad said that he would have, if they had allowed him to leave here, he would have gone to Green Bay. And his exact words, I think, to the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce was, I would have gotten that job. That's debatable. But yes, because the Vikings 2005 was rough. It wasn't terrible. And if I recall, the Packers 2005 was atrocious.
Yeah, the Packers had a couple weird periods where it looked like they were kind of coming to like early 2000s and then again like 2005, but then they would always kind of pop back up. And there's a lot to get into here. So this is my pie chart today. Judd, you did the pie chart. It's pie chart week here, historical pie chart week. You did yesterday's. And then I know Declan just got done watching Minneapolis Miracle, so we'll sprinkle that in with a couple other ones this week. If you have found this maybe later on, like months and months later, these are going to be relevant. This is going to be like kind of our little what do they call it when you bury like a box in the backyard? A time capsule.
Time capsule.
Yeah, it's like part of our Vikings time capsule here.
Absolutely.
And before we get to the actual pie here, we're going to lay out kind of the scene for what this game represented. Presented also by Federated Mutual Insurance Company, by the way. Federated's been around for over 100 years, helping businesses maximize their level of success. Federated's corporate culture is grounded in equity, integrity, teamwork, and respect. And these 4 cornerstones create the foundation that supports all interactions and decision-making at Federated and, by extension, with the work they do for your business. At Federated Mutual Insurance Company, it's our business to protect yours. So after losing to the Packers twice in the 2004 regular season, 34-31 both times, mind you, the Vikings get their revenge in this game, going into Lambeau Field, a 31-17 victory in the wild card round. It was 27 degrees. The footing was awful. Kickers were having trouble on both sides. This is the Randy Moss mooning game as well. We're going to get into all of these tentacles. But the crazy thing about the lead up to this game is this was the second year in a row the Vikings started as one of the best, hottest teams in the league. So 2003, they started 6-0 and then fell on their face and missed the playoffs, right? All right, dust yourself off. Let's go back. Let's try this again in 2004. They start 5-1 in 2004. Again, one of the hottest teams in the NFL. And they stumble and fall on their face. They backpedal into the playoffs with an 8-8 record. Really bad, weird vibes heading into this game because in a win and in game at Washington in Week 17, with time still on the clock, Randy Moss walked off the sidelines and off the field. And so there's turmoil, and they wind up losing the game, and they backpedal in because somebody else lost like 20 minutes later. And so you had all these weird vibes going in. Is at the end of is Tice going to get fired? Are they going to get rid of Randy Moss? Which the answer was yes on both fronts at some point in the next 12 months. But for this 1 week, the Vikings put all of that aside. They jump out to a 17-0 lead, kind of hang on for dear life in the middle quarters. and then dagger the Packers in the fourth quarter with the infamous Randy Moss 34-yard touchdown and mooning celebration that drove Joe Buck to almost jump out of the press box.
Well, because he didn't understand what it was all about. But to go back to the game in Washington, not only did Moss decide to leave the field before the game was done, but Tice sent Burke to chase him down.
Yeah.
And Randy was having none of that. All week long, the beat guys had been basically saying that the Vikings have a chance to back into the playoffs. So in the locker room in Washington, Tice goes up to the writers, starts to walk backwards and says, "What am I doing?" And they're like, What are you doing, Mike? He said, "I'm backing in the playoffs." So, like, this was just all-time classic Vikings dysfunction, but Ticey was funny that period.
So do you guys want to do the Joe Buck thing real quick, or should we save that? Should I do the pie chart and then we can do the Joe, because I have some Joe Buck takes after watching this back. But.
Sure.
Pie chart, then Joe Buck.
Okay.
And just to contextualize this, not only was this the second consecutive year the Vikings got off to a great start and then absolutely collapsed, which didn't cost them a playoff berth in 2004 like it had in 2003, but it was the second consecutive year the Packers didn't get off to a great start themselves. They started 1-4 and then proceeded to go 9-2 to get to 10-6. So, like, in both cases, it's like, oh, the Vikings are going to win the North for sure. And in both cases, the Vikings come unglued and the Packers actually surged.
Amazing. So, all right, here we are. 6 slices, gentlemen.
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
We'll start with the smallest slices and work our way all the way up here. And maybe the first slice is 5%, and maybe I'm giving this 5% out of hopefulness for this year's Vikings team. But I'm giving 5% to the running back by committee approach by the Minnesota Vikings in this game and in this season. You have Mo Williams breaking a big screen pass for a touchdown. He had 72 receiving yards in this game. Mm-hmm. You had Ontario Smith breaking a big screen in the second half. He had 60 total yards in this game. Michael Bennett had 11 touches for over 40 yards. So between these 3 guys, you had over 170 yards of total offense. Different skill sets. Ontario Smith was your kick returner. So 20 years later now, almost, there is hope. Some of these early 2000s Vikings teams that were between, like, Robert Smith and Adrian Peterson, you can be very effective with a 3-headed monster, multiple running back approach.
And did you see who led the Vikings in rushing that day?
Daunte with 47, right?
47 yards.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, Mo had the screen pass that he took to the house to give the Vikings a 7-0 lead. I don't think he had a carry.
No, he didn't. He did
so
not.
Like he was
the third down back on that team.
And he was really good at that role. But it was such a different philosophy.
Yes. So 5% running back by committee. They're constantly rotating in fresh bodies, and it was very helpful in a high intensity playoff game, right? All right, 10% to Ted Cottrell, the Vikings defensive coordinator in this game.
I love Teddy. God, I love him.
Ted Cottrell received a Gatorade bath at the end of this game. Now, mind you, the Vikings had one of the worst defenses in the league in the regular season. I think they were like the 28th ranked defense. I don't know if that's scoring or yardage, but they said it off the top of the Fox broadcast. But they pressured Brett Favre all day long. They picked off 4 different passes. They had exotic looks. You had guys like, here's some blast from the past names. You had, Antoine Winfield coming on corner blitzes. You had Dontarius Thomas, the linebacker. E.J. Henderson was a young linebacker here, just sending everyone from all different angles. And after giving up 68 points in 2 games to the Packers in the regular season, Ted Cottrell and the Vikings defense hold the Packers at home, by the way, to just 17 points. So he gets a Gatorade bath after a wild card round win.
He was great, though. He was such a character, too. But yeah, that game was impressive. And I don't know if the Packers if the Packers took them lightly or the Vikings just played that well, but it did snowball. So, there's 2 Favre meltdowns possible. The first one is the one we've all seen a bunch, which is just this awful pass. And we'll certainly talk about that in the Saints look back at 2009. But the other Favre one that we saw, it was actually the season opener, I want to say 2003, when they reopened the renovated Lambeau. And this game when Favre would have the meltdown games. He had one of those against the Rams in
Yeah.
St. Louis as well. I think he threw like 5 picks that day. But like where it would just go south, and it didn't sort of like, oh man, he's struggling. It's like, oh my God, this is a disaster.
I think it was his last 2 playoff games in Lambeau as a Packer was this one and the infamous Giants one where he just had 2 games where he threw like a combined 10 interceptions. Like, I mean, he was awful in both those games.
Yeah, the Giants one, that's where Tom Coughlin's face is still frostbitten to this day.
Yeah.
And Favre looked like he wanted nothing to do with overtime or anything and throws the pick 6.
That terrible pass he threw that I think set up the Tynes field goal, if I'm not mistaken, was that an out route? Like it was he would have so much confidence, and his arm was great. Don't get me wrong. But like he would overvalue in crucial positions the fact that like these guys are still good.
Yeah.
And he would sling these passes. Like, what are you doing? But
And
anyway, this was a meltdown.
It's a good segue into the third slice of pie here, the pie chart of
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
pie chart of historical praise here for a Vikings playoff win, and 10% does go to Brett Favre as the Packers quarterback.
Yeah.
So as great as the Vikings defense was in terms of just it's the third time we're facing these guys, let's give them some different looks, whatever. Favre threw some really bad momentum killing interceptions here, and to kind of piggyback off what Jubb was saying, it was classic Favre. So they're behind. He feels like, oh, we're down by 17 or we're down by 10, or even when they're down by 7 or whatever it was, throughout the game. He feels like he's got to jam a pass into a non-existent window, as opposed to just like, let's keep playing the game here, right. Okay? Right. If you just keep playing the game, the Vikings defense is atrocious. You'll probably score the requisite amount of points. So the Vikings wind up with 4 different guys picking off Brett Favre. Another great blast from the pass set of names here. So Antoine picked a pass off. Mm-hmm. Brian Russell had an interception. Brian Williams had an interception. And Ralph Brown coming in for like an injured, I don't even know who. Corey Chavis? I don't know. Ralph Brown wound up picking off. Was he a safety?
Corey Chavis was a safety, and I think Ralph Brown, I thought
was he a corner?
I thought he was a corner.
Okay.
Looks like he was a defensive back, yeah.
So he picked off a pass at some point. Probably his only playoff interception, I'm guessing. But 10% to Brett Favre just deciding, I'm going to try and open some windows that aren't open right now. And,
just for being horrific?
Yes. All right, 15%. 3 more slices here. 15%.
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
To Randy Moss. Not quite the, whatever it was, 40% Judd gave him for the 98 Thanksgiving game. He was banged up in this one, clearly was unhappy with the way the season had played out. Was he also unhappy with his contract at the time? Was that a reason why they traded him?
I don't think so.
Because this was his second to last game as a Viking.
Yeah, he was unhappy with his contract when he came back here from the Patriots, and they didn't give him a new one. I don't recall. Now I was not on the beat at that time, as we talked about. I was doing the Packers, but I don't recall the contract being a problem. I think that it was just a disgruntlement. And the walking off the field thing, because if you go back, Tice, when he replaced Green, had come in with the Randy ratio and all of that. Like, this was all supposed to make, and the ultimate thing with Moss is eventually he'd get pissed off at you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this was sort of the last leg of, and you're probably right in this. My guess is Red didn't want to pay him. Well, he's trying to sell.
You know what's funny? If you go back and listen to the commentary in the 98 Thanksgiving game, they spend time at the beginning raving about, it's the 10-1 Vikings, and boy, what a game changer. Reb McCombs now owning this team has changed everything. He gave Denny a new contract. He gave raises to all the assistants, and how quickly the shine wore off on that, because he wound up getting really cheap really fast. And you can probably speak to this more than I could, but toward the end of the Tice run, wasn't there a huge issue with the Vikings just had like underpaid, underqualified staff members and coaches, right?
Yeah. Well, Steve Loney in 2005 was the offensive line coach and offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Like, the offensive line coach is a full-time job. You're in charge of 5. Like there's no, I can cheat that. And they went from a staff that, I don't know if it was ever really well paid with Red, but it was certainly probably representative. once Tice came in, they were paying nothing, and including Mike. I mean, Mike didn't break the bank, so
that's why he had to sell Super Bowl tickets for four
you're
times
not wrong
face value.
entirely. But there was but by the point that we're talking about now, yes, red being cheap had become an enormous problem.
Yeah. And so back to Moss for a second here, because he's the 15% slice of pie. He was limping around. He had a bad ankle. He walked off the field in week 17. He's coming to the end of his Vikings career here, and they're going to make one of the dumbest trades in Minnesota sports history because they got a first-round pick and a bad linebacker, and they turned it into Troy Williamson, the pick. But he does wind up getting open in classic Moss fashion for 2 touchdowns here. One that kind of broke the game open early, and then the other one that sealed the game halfway through the fourth quarter. And he wanders over to the goalpost, fakes like he's pulling his pants down, does the dance. Let's save that discussion for after the pie chart. 15% to Randy Moss. 20% slice of pie. 2 more
The
left
Rock
here.
knows how you feel about pie.
To probably the peak moment in this guy's coaching career, Mike Tice. Mike Tice. For the lack of resources and for just kind of having to deal with the cantankerous Randy Moss, I think Mike Tice, I'm not saying he's Bill Belichick, but Mike Tice was a pretty good head coach. He could coach offense. I think he was a likable fella. When things were going off the rails, it became kind of tough for him, but he had 1 week to pull this team together. All the things we've already said, right? They backed their way in. They lost like 7 of the last 9 games to finish the season. Randy Moss has pissed off the entire locker room. And you got 1 week, guy, to figure out how to bring everyone together and put together a game plan that's going to work here. And so one of his tactics that week, according to the Fox broadcast, was a full padded, full contact practice.
That's in my notes.
A full contact, full padded practice. Tackling. They're tackling each other midweek. It's January.
Oh, my God.
And then I'm sure he had something to do with maybe, helping with the defensive game plan, bring extra pressure to fluster Brett Favre. But Mike Tice pushed all the right buttons. Now, because of all this, they might have been completely gassed going to Philadelphia for the divisional round, and they got smoked. But credit to Mike Tice for doing what he had to do to get that team ready to come out and blow the doors off Green Bay.
I mean, from 2002, 2003, 2004, the Vikings offense was second, first, and fourth in yards. And they were a top 10 scoring offense, too, in all of those seasons. So, I mean, he could definitely coach offense, 100%. Yep. I remember this bit briefly as a kid, and I'm now confirming it on Pro Football Reference. He only won 8 out of 32 challenges, which is 25%. That's pretty bad.
Patrick referred to him in the Star Tribune as Coach Flaggy.
Pat was telling us that story on Unchained today.
Throw the flag all the time. Well, guess what? He was Zim before Zim. He would look at the scoreboard and get pissed off and throw the flag. It's like, dude, that's not how this works.
The result of a play didn't go the right way, right?
Toss the flag and get all mad. And Declan's right. It was like, no. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, though, is this is also the second to last game, not just for Moss. Scott Linehan, second to last game as OC. And that's where it went sideways. Supposedly, and Scott was a smart guy, ended up as head coach of the Rams. Yeah. But supposedly the story was he was the magic elixir for Culpepper. And he's the one that basically, with Daunte, said, we're going to split the field into 4 parts. We're going to keep this as simple as possible, and you're going to be very good. In 2004, to go back, was phenomenal. So, I think the biggest loss going into 2005, certainly Moss hurt, but I think the biggest loss was Linehan's ability to call plays and coach offense was huge for Tice. And with that gone, Culpepper, before he got hurt, got off to a god-awful start in 2005.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, what would have become of Culpepper if he hadn't shredded the knee? Would it just have been, he had a bad first half and he would have bounced back?
But, let's say he doesn't shred the knee. Now, contractually, it might have gone off the rails regardless because, he had staged in 2005 that one-day Wildcat walkout. But let's just say from a football standpoint, how much would Chile have got from him? I'm not saying that he wouldn't have been good, but I think of if Kevin O'Connell could have gotten Culpepper in Culpepper's prime, I'm pretty damn sure it could have been special. Oh. What would Chile have? Because Chile claims, I took the job. I thought I had a franchise QB. Culpepper was going to be my guy, but he was still going to come in and run his system.
Yeah.
and he wasn't going to deviate from that. So that's a really good question. Sorry.
He was in love with T-Jack, who was an athletic guy with a humongous arm. I mean, Daunte Culpepper at his peak was an athletic guy with a humongous arm that nearly won an MVP award. Like, so
That's
to me,
yeah, it's funny.
That's kind of how I would look at it. And I know maybe he really wanted to mold a guy, right? Like some guys just really want to draft their own quarterback and mold them as their own project.
He wanted Culpepper. He did want Daunte. My problem is this, though. Just like with T-Jack, I don't think T-Jack ever really got a fair chance because Brad said, I like how you're built, so we're going to plug you into what I do.
I've never heard this take from you.
The West, dude, this old school West Coast philosophy that you will get into my system. I mean, Daunte Culpepper, look, Linehan gave Daunte the opportunity to thrive at what Daunte did by simplifying the game. He didn't force him to do things. Brad forced his guys to do things. And that's my point is, and I'm not saying T-Jack would have been great, but as Declan just said, athletic guy with a huge arm. Those things really weren't used. I mean, how many times, Phil, did Brad sit there and talk to us about Tavares needing to improve at things like spitting out the play, the verbiage? It's like, what are you talking about?
I'm just saying, and by the way, my stick slice of pie
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
is 40% to Daunte Culpepper, which I'll come back to that. But I just want to, you and I have been doing shows together for like a decade. I don't know if I've ever heard the Tavares Jackson never received a fair shake take from you. This is a brand new
that's
package
years later
that's just been
you know what
sitting
this
in the
is?
closet.
This is a breaking piece of this show that I'm bringing back as a callback to a time. Well, the more I think about it, and the more I see, especially now, because I think back then it was different. The more that you see coaches like O'Connell, who definitely have opinions and ideas and philosophies, right? But what does he do? He also adjusts.
Yeah, what do you feel comfortable doing?
Right, which we've talked about 1,000 times. You know, Declan nailed Tavares' skill set. In no way, shape, or form did being focused on spitting out the West Coast, and that West Coast verbiage, we can laugh about it, but it's huge.
It's a mouthful, as Brad Childress used to say.
So you're telling me that you drafted this guy, and instead of saying, okay, dude, you do a lot of things well, you might not do X, Y, and Z, and I like X, Y, and Z, but to win, I'm going to have to move off that.
I pulled up a West Coast offense playbook here.
Incredible.
I mean, it is
it's what Favre had
It is
down.
a mouthful. Brown right, F short, 2-jet flanker drive on two.
Break.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll give you the Daunte thing here just to wrap the pie chart of praise for this game. Everything, I mean, he definitely had the ability to go cold for stretches and throw a bunch of interceptions. He was a fumble machine in his career. So, when you're talking about like the floor of a player, Daunte's floor is a lot lower than, say, Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins isn't going to lead the league in interceptions and fumbles in a season. Right. Although he had fumbling issues early in his career too. But this was a game where you saw the absolute best qualities of Daunte. You saw the arm in the cold. You saw the big body and mobility. Some of the plays were schemed bootlegs and rollouts. Some of them were schemed runs. Some of them were just get out of the pocket, find an open. But then there's other times where, and the offensive line was pretty good during this era too. You had like Matt Burke as a Pro Bowler, Bryant McKinney. I mean, you had some. David Dixon was, I think, still on this team. I think I saw David Dixon running around there. So you had a good offensive line, but then when the pocket would break down, he's a house. Like you're not going to have these situations where one defensive lineman comes through and like gets an arm on his shoulder pad. Like you needed full body 300 pounds to take him down. And he winds up throwing for 284, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He ran 7 times for 47 yards, kept drives alive. And he was the second best quarterback in the NFL in 2004. And he crushed the Packers during this time period too. I want to say that if you took like his last 4 games against the Packers or something, it was like 16 touchdown passes, no interceptions. And he just, at his peak, he was just one of the best. And you do kind of wonder, because we rave about Anthony Richardson and all this, like the relative athletic score. That was Daunte 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yep.
What would he look like in today's NFL with a Kevin O'Connell, right? I mean, he was dominant in that version of the NFL. What would he look like with a Justin Jefferson and some of these guys today. Now, he had Randy Moss, so he definitely had weapons. Don't get me wrong. But, yeah, this peak Daunte Culpepper, 40%, carried the Vikings in this game. Mike Tice, 20%. Randy Moss, 15%. Brett Favre, 10% for just being an interception howitzer. 10% Ted Cottrell, the defensive coordinator. And 5% running back by committee.
The Rock knows how you feel about pie.
So,
Offensive line that day, Bryant McKinney at left tackle, Chris Lewinsky at left guard, Matt Burke at center, you're right, David Dixon at right guard, and Mike Rosenthal at right tackle.
okay. Mike Rosenthal. Some names, man.
Greg Beekert was on that team. But
Beaker
just to be,
was Lance Johnstone was on that team.
Yeah. Just to be clear on Jackson, I'm not saying I think that he would have been great. I'm saying I don't think we ever saw if he could have been good.
He probably would have been a first-round draft pick in retrospect. I know he went to Arkansas State, so I guess maybe that would have prevented him from. But in today's NFL, I feel like you would have built something around him as opposed to trying to jam him into like the Donovan McNabb offense that Brad Childress was around, right?
Exactly. And so I just think that there's, but I guess at that point in Culpepper's career, if he had been healthy and come back here for Childress, is he far enough along where Childress doesn't screw him up, or again, by asking him to do West Coast things? Because I mean, that's the short passing game followed by a deep threat, establishing the run, and would Childress have been too concerned about Daunte fumbling to run the ball? Would Childress not have cared? I think McNabb in his prime certainly ran, right?
Yeah.
So just a lot of questions there with Culpepper. And again, it's really the last guy that this team drafted who could have been considered anything close to a franchise quarterback.
Yeah. Super interesting. There's a few other things here to get into, including I think I'm going to walk back one of my Joe Buck takes from recently after watching this game back. I want to throw that at you guys, but let's shout out our friends at Livia for helping Purple Daily listeners lose a lot of weight. And we want to hear your stories too, if you've gone down the Livia route before.
That is 1,000% right. If you want to go from looking like sports dad on the left, a little chunky there, got to admit it, to looking like sports dad on the right, ooh, looking good in that suit. It's as simple as this.
Oh, hey. Was he Paul Bear?
Oh,
my soul dad.
And if you want the first 8 weeks for free, contact them now, 855-GO-LIVEA, Livia.com. And as Phil just said, we also want to hear your stories, because we know a lot of folks in our PD community have tried this plan and have sent us notes previously that it works. Send us a note to share LIVEA, Livia at scorenorth.com, and you will receive a Score North prize pack. In fact, I've got one here quickly. Steve checked it. Steve said, Steve, who's had great success, said, I just wanted to keep you updated on how things are going. I just had my in-body appointment today, and I'm happy to report that I'm down a total of 45.2 pounds.
Whoa.
And 25.5 from my goal. I can't wait to hit that goal, to shake your hand and say thank you for the encouragement and helping me live a better life. If you want to be like Steve, again, Livia.com is where it starts. Folks, I'm telling you, the program works. The support is fantastic.
Steve, that is awesome.
Congratulations,
man. 45 pounds. Yeah, hit us up with your stories here. Also, if you're looking for a great lunch spot or just a spot that's awesome in the North Loop of Minneapolis, 3 Jack has become one of our favorite places here.
Yeah, it's got golf sims. It's got a great selection of beers and a great lunch menu as well. In fact, they got summer beer dinner series coming up this week. They're going to team up with some local breweries, some of my favorites. They got Prize Brewery. They got Inbound. They have Bent Paddle that'll be there as well. They're featuring food pairings with brews from local favorites. And, of course, their great burger series. This week, boys, we got a Blue Rooster burger. Blue cheese, rooster aioli, crispy onion, barbecue pickles. I mean, come on. That's the best type of burger you can have there. You can book those, you can book also a bay if you want to get some swings in at 3jack.com. To learn more about all these happenings and going on, go to 3jack and 3jack.com.
So, okay, on the Joe Buck thing for a second here. You know, his infamous comments. Randy Moss goes over and does the fake mooning, and Joe Buck calls it a disgusting act, and it's unfortunate that we had that on our air.
Yes.
And in the moment, as a college kid, I was like everybody else, like, Joe Buck hates the Vikings, right? And then I feel like as I matured, got a little older, consumed a lot more Joe Buck over the years, I felt like, I don't know, it wasn't his shiniest moment by any means, but people are just generally too hard on Joe Buck. He had a weird outburst in that game, but he's usually pretty damn good. After consuming that full game, he was so condescending compared to where he is now. Like his tone now, and he's like a 55, 60-year-old guy now. He's so much more fun and light, and I mean, yeah, the guy's made $20 million a year for 20 years. Like, he walks a little lighter now. There was just a weird chip on his shoulder during this entire game, during the pregame introductions, as the players are like, so the game starts, and then now they're going to put the defensive players on the screen, right, introduce everyone. And he goes, these Vikings linebackers are big, and they have a tendency to get confused. Like, when have you ever heard a play-by-play guy say something that aggressive, that these are big, dumb linebackers, basically, that have a tendency to get confused? So that really stood out, that it wasn't just that comment. It was just his general demeanor was a lot more condescending than I remember compared to now anyways.
So if you go back and watch Buck, both doing baseball and football for Fox back then, and he's my age. So he was born in April of 69. So he just turned 54. I'll turn 54 in November. But if you go back and watch those old school games from Joe Buck, the condescending thing is 1,000% correct.
It is.
And people hated that. And the problem is that became the impression of Joe Buck.
Yep.
To where like now it's changed. But if you watch the open for that game too, look at how young Aikman and Buck and
Collinsworth, Collinsworth was in that booth.
Here's a guy who's in the Fox booth.
Okay, that's another one. Collinsworth. So this is 19 years ago, and that booth, by the way, you had Joe Buck, Troy Aikman, and Chris Collinsworth as a 3-man booth.
Yep.
Collinsworth was so much more critical of players and teams and coaches in 2004 than he is now. Now it's like people make fun of him because here's a guy. I love all these guys, right? He just talks about how much he loves football. And then he would, like, every time he would chime in, it was to poke at someone or to just flat out crap on somebody. So yeah, like the whole tone, Aikman was a little more critical, but the general tone was condescending, poking, criticizing a lot more than you would hear now on like Sunday and Monday Night Football.
I feel like too, he's kind of gotten over that. I think he's even addressed it in like post interviews and stuff over the years. And I mean, I was just watching back the Minneapolis Miracle too, which by the way, I don't think I have watched that start to finish. I was there live for it, but I don't believe I've watched that game start to finish. And just even looking back at where he was 5 years ago to obviously listening to games, every year now, he's good. And to be honest, Phil, you were in college. I was like 11, 12 years old when this game was played. Like, I'm as an 11-year-old, and if you get the opinion when you were a teenager of, oh, screw that guy because he said this dumb thing when I was 12, and now you're 30 years old and you're still holding on to a grudge from when you were a teenager.
Yeah,
I would recommend maybe growing up a little bit and just kind of understanding too that he's actually a pretty damn good play-by-play guy.
And I agree with everything you just said, with the sprinkling of, he has changed a lot in 20 years. Oh, yeah. And he kind of was a prick, to be honest, in 2004. And so some of that angst was warranted. And I'll never forget, like, it was around that time or a couple years later, there was a Cardinals-Mets, like, NLCS game. And there was an eighth inning, somewhat like the Mets left fielder robbed a freaking home run in a 1-run game, like on the doorstep of the World Series. And the way he called it was as if, almost like his dad would call something that he's seen for 50 years, right? It's like, fly ball, left field, caught. Like it was as if I've seen better than this, right? That, I feel like that was his tone a lot back in that day. So yeah, like, get over it if you were mad, but he's changed as well, I guess.
Well, his call that Dex is talking about on the Miracle game is one of the best I've ever heard. Yep. Like, that is one of the best use of as few words as possible, but yet it sets a scene.
Steps into it, passes, caught! Diggs! Sideline! Touchdown! Unbelievable! Vikings win it!
Yeah. I mean, that is phenomenal. But so there's a few things with Buck, though, to go back. First of all, he was, as I think, an 18th birthday gift. He was with his dad in the booth for a Cardinals radio game, I think, in Shea Stadium. And as a gift, his dad walked out of the booth and said, "You're up." So, like, I mean, we're talking about a guy that was privileged as you can get. That doesn't make him a bad person, but I'm saying that trended towards things. And if you go back to, I think he really changed his tune on life with the hair plug incident when he became addicted to hair plugs, and then it affected. He had that vocal cord meltdown, and like they were
related to his hair plugs.
It might have been, but anyway, the point is, like, these were all very serious things, and the vocal cord thing, they at one time weren't sure if he could come back and work. So, like, I mean, it was almost all taken away, and I feel like after that, he really changed things, and plus, he got humbled in a huge way by that HBO debacle, where he tried to replace Costas, and who was the comedian, Artie, somebody who
Artie
went
Lang.
on, and just destroyed him, and I think he thought that he could hack that. And so, like, Joe's had a lot of things that have probably put him in his place. But the greatest part about that call, talk about fans being pissed, you guys, Red McCombs was so incensed, he spent the week trying to get Joe Buck removed from the Philadelphia game. I wrote about it for the script at the time.
Dude, it was like, I was really excited to get to that point in the game. It was out of place. His anger and vitriol was so... And I get it was a different era. Like, maybe we're just used to more smutty things on TV now than we were in 2004. But even Aikman and Collinsworth tried to move quickly, but they didn't stay on it at all. Like, Buck makes that's a disgusting act. I'm sorry that even had to air on our channel. And Aikman's like, just getting back to the play for a second here. You know, let's look at what actually happened on the play. But it felt personal. Oddly personal with, I don't know if he got blown off by Randy Moss or something, or if he just...
Yeah, it did. You're right.
It just felt like, wow, that was... Yeah, I mean, first of all, it wasn't disgusting. It was just a guy having fun, and it wasn't... He didn't actually pull his pants down. So it kind of made me stop, even though I've seen and heard it a million times. Like, wow, that felt... That feels like there was something that happened behind the scenes between him and Randy Moss, and now it's playing out in this form, I guess.
It's weird, too, because Moss scores the touchdown in the corner of the end zone, runs by the goalpost, and does that. And Collinsworth has the first word after the play-by-play gets done, because he said, and Moss shoots the moon, and sort of starts to laugh. And then, to your point, Buck, like, just storms in with, that's disgusting.
Disgusting.
And we found out that was because Packer fans would moon the Vikings bus at Lambeau as the bus left.
Yep.
Like, it was just a bit.
Yep. And Buck obviously didn't know that context, or he probably would have reacted differently, or maybe he would have colored it in with context. So one other thing from my notebook here in this game. So the Vikings kicker was 44-year-old Morton Anderson in this game. 44 years. The guy entered the league in 1982, and he was the Vikings kicker here. This is January of 2005. He was so bad. So he first of all, he slipped on a 27-yarder, which you could kind of blame the turf, I guess, but, like, you know, guys have played on bad turf before. He slipped and fell on his keister for a 27-yarder, and they wind up eating it. And then I don't know if you guys saw this, but he almost came up short on a 35-yard field goal early in the game.
He was an old man.
Literally hit the back of the crossbar on a 35-yard field goal.
Yeah, he couldn't kick within 40 yards, right? Like, I mean, he
didn't attempt a field goal over 49 yards that entire season. They just didn't even try.
And the field, from the start of the show, Phil, the field was in terrible shape, and the wind whips around that bowl. So the wind was probably a factor. But yeah, the Vikings, I mean, how many guys, and some are good, how many old kickers has this team had? Jan Stenerud at one point, Morton and Gary Anderson at one point. Like, they recycled every old kicker that they could find. And then, of course, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in 2005, Paul Edinger, one of the strangest guys I've ever covered, came in and kicked and beat the Packers with, like, what, a 55-yard field goal at the Metrodome in the regular season.
His mechanics turn your back to the goalpost.
I know what you're talking about,
man. Oh man. So there's your pie chart of praise here for a pretty big moment in that era of Vikings football, going into Lambeau Field and winning a playoff game. Let's shout out our friends at Finch Home Solutions. You know, Finch, very supportive of the purple and anyone who is a purple fan, Judd.
Yep. And if you call them, guess what? That van, that purple colored van is going to show up. And here's the thing. You are going to know that you have, when it comes to electrical work, electrical issues at your house, the best team in town outside your door. Courteous, professional, fast installation, repair, inside, outside, project size. They can do it all. In fact, they also have 24/7 service if there's an emergency. But the fact is, if you're having a big project done or a small one, Finch Home Solutions, they are the people to call. 612-357-2604 or finchhomesolutions.com. Finch Home Solutions is going to take care of any electrical issues that you might have. And of course, tell them that Purple Daily sent you, and talk some Vikings as well, because they all love the Vikings.
Amen. All right, guys, there it is. Your historical pie chart of praise for the Vikings beating the Packers. Be on the lookout for more of these episodes. And we're going to stockpile all of them on the Purple Daily YouTube channel, too, on that homepage. You can scroll down and see all of our sort of historical look backs at different moments in Vikings history. We'll see you guys next time.